New videos every day.
There's this idea of catastrophization, which is there's a little threat this big, but you have this big a reaction because you're blowing it up into the world's going to be over. This is the worst danger ever. I'm going to die. It's a disaster. When really it's just a little bump in the road.
Welcome to Alternative Health. I'm your host, Karina Rachel, and I'm joined today by Dr. Colin Ross. Our topic today is anxiety. So if this is something that you have experienced, I hope that you will let me know. And if you have questions, you can leave us your questions as well. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, anxiety is something that we get lots and lots of questions about on our channel, and is clearly something that pretty much everyone experiences in varying degrees. But in this video, I'd like to talk about, severe anxiety, or people who have even received a diagnosis of anxiety, and maybe some strategies for helping people to, relieve that anxiety they're experiencing.
Sure. So anxiety is the most common mental health symptom, and it takes all kinds of different forms, and it can be to different degrees. So there's not just one answer. And what you mentioned is very much the case, that anxiety in and of itself is totally normal. In fact, in some situations, if you didn't have anxiety, there'd be something wrong with you, such as you're walking through the zoo and the lion gets out. And there's very clear evidence from lots and lots of experiments. There's kind of a U-shaped curve. If your anxiety level is nothing, your performance isn't as good on whatever the task is. If your anxiety goes up, focuses you divert all your energy to the task, your performance actually goes up. But then at a certain point that peaks, and then when your anxiety becomes too much, your thinking brain starts to shut down. The limbic system part of your brain, the emotion part, just floods all this anxiety, and your performance crashes.
Right.
So some anxiety appropriate to the situation is not only just normal, it's good, it's helpful. And whether you are an evolution kind of person or a creationism kind of person, either way, clearly we have adrenaline system and a fight, flight, fear response for a reason. It's part of survival. It makes sense. And so built into all mammals are fight, flight, and freeze. So if there's a threat from a predator and you happen to be a grizzly bear, odds are you're going to fight. If you happen to be a gazelle, odds are you're going to run away, which is flight. And if you're a possum, you're probably going to roll up in a ball and freeze. So as humans, we have this built-in three-part system: fight, flight, freeze. Some people tend to do more one, some more the other. In different situations, all are useful, helpful survival strategies. And they're not really choices in a sense. Your body just kind of jumps into that mode often. And so when there's a threat and there's fight or flight, there obviously is adrenaline, your heart rate's up. You're shunting energy from digestion, from sex, from other activities into your muscles, your fight system. And so if it's just an acute episode, something happens like a car almost hits you, then it's over, and then the system settles back down again and you carry on, that's all good. The problem comes when the fight, flight, anxiety, arousal system gets stuck in on position when there's no threat there.
Right.
So that can happen in a whole variety of different ways and different levels. So if we just talk about phobias, which are really common, let's say you have a phobia of panda bears and you live in Texas. That's not really a problem, right? So you could have an anxiety problem, but it's not a practical problem because you're not around panda bears. But if you have a spider phobia, or if you have a small furry animal phobia, and there's lots of cats and dogs around, and you go visit family members, they have cats and dogs, now it becomes a problem. So you always have to look at, whether it's anxiety or depression or whatever it is, you have to look at it in the context. Is it out of proportion to the context? If it's out of proportion, is it causing some sort of distress, dysfunction, interfering with what you want to do in life. Because it could be just some anxiety that's not causing a problem. But I've certainly worked with people who can't go visit relatives because the relatives have pets. And so then part of the desensitization is, which you always do these things on your own. Often it's helpful to have a therapist because the therapist knows all the steps and the lingo. But there's lots of self-help books out there, Amazon or bookstores, how to cope with anxiety. And so if you, say, have a small furry animal phobia, and anytime you see a dog, like you become frozen or you have to leave the situation, basically you want to start with desensitization. And desensitization means breaking things down into little steps. So if you had we'll jump back to spider phobia. If you had a spider phobia, the first step is not throw yourself into a pit with 2,000 spiders, right?
Right.
Because you're just going to be overwhelmed. So if you're working with a therapist, what the therapist will do is, okay, let's just try some breathing exercises, try some self-relaxation, some refocusing, so we can talk about spiders and you can talk yourself down. Okay, now that you've practiced and you've learned the skill of talking yourself down, controlling your breathing, now let's look at pictures of spiders. And then when you go to the next step, it's going to be, oh my God. And heart's going to go up. And then you practice your breathing, practice your refocusing, maybe some self-hypnosis, whatever it might be. Now you're able to calm yourself down at that step. And you just work your way along. Then a plastic spider, a natural spider that's embedded in a square of plastic. And then you could go to the pet store where they have spiders.
In cages.
But you don't get out of your car. You just stay in the parking lot. And then you go and you touch the door. So you actually break it down into the tiniest little steps. And there's a good solid track record for this kind of exercise, getting you to the point where you can have the tarantula walking on your hand and you just think it's kind of furry and funny. So I see that you're not there yet.
No.
But there's no purpose or reason to do that desensitization if it's not causing you trouble in your life.
Right.
So that's kind of the phobia desensitization part of it. And either in parallel with that or mixed in, there's also looking at your thinking. Because this, which I explained in another video, there's this idea of catastrophization, which is there's a little threat this big, but you have this big a reaction. Because you're blowing it up into the world's going to be over, this is the worst danger ever, I'm going to die, it's a disaster. When really it's just a little bump in the road. So then part of it also is working on your thinking, taking a step back and really doing a threat evaluation. It's almost like being in the military or being in Homeland Security or something. You want to do a threat analysis, not with all the anxiety flooded up and your thinking gone. You want to try and step back, step out of the situation, wait till things are settled down, then reevaluate. Okay, say, what exactly is the threat here? Okay, so it's a spider. How many people do I know in Texas who've died from spider bites, or in the United States? Or what are the odds that this is going to happen? What are the treatments for spider bites? How many spiders have I seen in my house in the last year? And so you just have to do a very sensible, realistic analysis of exactly what is the level of threat here. And then you have to compare your response to the level of threat, and then reevaluate it and just cognitively talk yourself down. That's another part of it. Another part of it can be, which is a minority of the time, but it can happen, going to the doctor and getting your thyroid checked. Because sometimes a person will be anxious because their thyroid's overactive and there's too much thyroid hormone. Most of the time that's not the case, but sometimes.
Right.
So there can be just pure medical causes for anxiety, but usually it's coming from something in your life experience. So often we get stuck, which is a hallmark of post-traumatic stress disorder, which has a lot of anxiety symptoms. Often we get stuck in the present in a reaction to the reality of the past. So let's say somebody was bit and mauled by a dog. Well, then in the moment when that was happening, that was frightening, scary, overwhelming, life-threatening, and the dog was too big, too fast, too strong, you couldn't escape. So that's a pretty serious situation, and it's normal to have a whole bunch of anxiety.
Right.
But now you're having that much anxiety when a chihuahua walks by. So again, you have to step back, do the threat analysis. But part of it is trying to figure out, well, where did this all start in my life? Was it from abusive parents? Was it from bullying at school? Was it from performance pressure at school? Usually there's some sort of story that makes sense. Okay, I got into this anxiety pattern for the following reasons. Sometimes, like in panic attacks, so you can have general anxiety, which is kind of grumbling along, fluctuating up and down. And it's exactly what it says, general anxiety. Or you can have panic attacks, where you're kind of going along, if there's a 0 to 100 scale, you're going along at 0, 10 on the anxiety scale. And all of a sudden, up to 100, stays up there for a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No, we're back down to 80, and then gradually over a few hours, we get back down to maybe not 0, but down to 20. So that's a panic attack. And in the literature, those are divided into cued and spontaneous. So cued means there's actually a trigger. So if you have a panic attack when you see the spider, because you have a spider phobia, it's not just random. And so then we could do this desensitization. But sometimes the panic attack just seems to happen totally out of context. So then you can't really desensitize yourself.
Right.
Except from occasional, apparently spontaneous panic attacks, you can start developing agoraphobia because you have a panic attack at the supermarket. So then you don't want to go back to the supermarket because you're going to have another panic attack. But it's okay to go to the drugstore. But then you have a panic attack at the drugstore. Now you can't go to the drugstore, and you can end up withdrawing your perimeter and actually become housebound. Then this desensitization is a big part of the treatment. So you can actually have a therapy assignment of walk down to the end of your sidewalk and back, which can be overwhelming and difficult. So you can even start with go out on the front step and back. So depending on how severe and pervasive the anxiety is, you start with smaller steps. So this desensitization is always a big part of it. Changing your thinking, doing the life review, and just making it be something that's understandable, that isn't just coming from nowhere, because that's part of getting control of it. And then even when there's, quote, spontaneous panic attacks, if you look really carefully, they're often not totally spontaneous.
Right.
There's usually sort of a general high level of stress going on in your life at the time. So it may not be this specific thing, but clearly the panic attack started in a period of high stress in your life.
Right.
So then that takes us to all the normal general stress management things. What is the stress in your life? Can you do something about it or not? If you can't do anything about it because it's the workplace, well, you could quit. Is it worth it, the extra income or the security, to be living this life of stress with this toxic workplace and this horrible, nasty bosses and endless performance pressures, and you've got to produce more in less time? Maybe it's just not worth it. Maybe the solution to the anxiety problem is actually changing jobs.
Situation.
Yeah, so it's all a combination of working on yourself and your own unrealistic overreactions. And, well, wait a minute. Starting when I was a kid, going through my whole life story up to the reality of the present, maybe the problem's on the outside, maybe I'm overreacting a little, but really the solution is changing the outside.
Right.
So it's really putting all these things in combination, looking at all of these things. And then, as always is the case, let's say I'm anxious, so I can't sleep. I'm having nightmares. Well, probably drinking coffee at night's not helping, right?
Right.
And so then we have all the strategies for sleep, because if you get a better night's sleep,
It's going to help with the anxiety.
it's going to help with life, and it's going to help with anxiety, because you're not so overwhelmed, you're not so stressed out, you feel more resourceful,
Right.
you have more good, strong type energy. So then exercise, healthy diet, all these things, no matter what your mental health problems, or even if you don't have mental health problems, these are all good things. And there's increasing evidence that good, healthy lifestyle things including exercise, can help with depression, anxiety, other mental health problems.
Wow.
So it's not just like one thing, and there's not just one thing to do about it.
Right.
The more directions you can hit the problem from, the better.
Excellent. Well, any other closing remarks on our
I think that's
discussion?
a quick skim over anxiety, give people a little orientation.
Definitely. And we did do the other video about cognitive therapy for depression, and I think a lot of those techniques would also apply over for anxiety
Right.
as well. So that's kind of another...
There's a large literature on cognitive therapy for anxiety.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video helpful and interesting. I look forward to reading your feedback and reading your thoughts on this topic. Again, we do have that related video on cognitive therapy for depression. So if you're looking for even more resources, I highly recommend that video. I hope you'll subscribe to the Psyche Truth channel so that you can come back and join me again in the future. I hope you have a beautiful day. I want to thank you so much for watching.